What would your younger self say about how your family turned out?
My family didn't invite me to Christmas this year, and when I first realized it, I thought maybe I had missed a message or maybe something had gone wrong with my phone. But the truth is they really did go ahead and celebrate without me, all of them dressed up, laughing, eating together, taking those perfectly staged holiday photos they love so much. And they did it knowing I was not there, not even considered, not even asked, and while that might sound like just one bad decision or some oversight, for me it felt like the final nail in a long coffin of exclusion that has been going on for years. I've never been the center of attention in my family, not once, and whenever we had gatherings and someone would pull out the camera to capture the moment, I was always the one told to hold the phone or take the picture, which meant that when the final photos circulated later on, I was never in them. My presence literally erased as though I had never shown up, as though my existence wasn't worth remembering. When I was younger, I used to laugh it off and tell myself that being behind the camera was just as important, but as the years went by, I noticed a pattern forming. Every single big holiday album had my siblings smiling at the center of the table. My parents with their arms around each other, cousins squeezed in together, and me either missing completely or shoved to the far side where no one even noticed whether I was smiling or not. I didn't complain because I thought maybe I was overthinking it, maybe I was being too sensitive. But there was always this quiet ache that grew inside me each time the pictures were posted online and relatives commented on how beautiful the family looked or how proud they must be of the kids. And I knew in those moments that I wasn't one of the kids they were proud of. I was just someone who happened to share their last name. My younger brother, Matt, was always the golden child, praised for his promotions, his car, his new house, while my sister, Erin, was admired for her family, her kids, the way she seemed to represent stability, and then there was me. The one who chose a different career path, who didn't get married right away, who worked in an industry they didn't really understand, and because of that, they never seemed to take me seriously. Whenever I shared something about my work, it was brushed off with polite nods or backhanded comments like, "That's nice, but when are you going to settle down?" or "It must be fun to have so much free time." The truth was I worked harder than most of them could imagine, but because my work didn't look like theirs, they saw it as less valuable, and that attitude seeped into everything, right down to the holiday pictures. Over time, I stopped even expecting to be treated equally. I just showed up, smiled when I had to, and quietly went home feeling smaller each year. And then came this Christmas, when I didn't even get the chance to show up. They didn't call, they didn't text, they didn't ask if I was free or if I wanted to come. They just gathered without me, and the only reason I knew it happened was because I saw it all online. There they were, my whole family lined up in front of the big tree at the restaurant they love to book for holidays, glasses raised, faces glowing, the caption reading, "Another year, another memory with the best family in the world." That caption hit me harder than the photos themselves, because it made it clear that in their version of reality, I wasn't even part of the best family in the world. I was simply cut out. At first, I felt this pit in my stomach, that old familiar ache of being excluded, but then it turned into something sharper, almost like a switch flipping. I thought back to all the years I swallowed my feelings, all the times I said nothing when I should have spoken up, and I realized that this was never going to change. They were never going to wake up one day and see me differently, because they didn't want to see me at all. So I sat there, staring at those pictures, thinking about how I could let this destroy me like it always had, or I could decide that if they were going to treat me like I was invisible, I'd find a way to make myself impossible to ignore. It wasn't about begging them for recognition anymore, it was about taking it back on my own terms. I thought about how many years I had wasted waiting for validation that was never going to come, and I felt this strange mix of pain and clarity, like for the first time in my life I could see the situation exactly as it was. They had excluded me so many times that finally, I didn't feel like I had to keep playing their game. And that's when the question hit me. So, what do you do when your own family pretends you don't exist? Do you just keep taking it year after year, or do you decide that maybe it's time to write your own story, one they can't crop you out of no matter how hard they try? I didn't have the answer yet, but I knew one thing this time: I wasn't going to let it slide. This time, They were going to notice me whether they liked it or not. I wish I could tell you that I found out in some gentle way that gave me a minute to breathe and collect myself, but the truth is I learned the way everyone seems to learn hard things now, which is by stumbling into a perfect square of happy faces while scrolling. And there they were again, my whole family in full force, clinking glasses at the restaurant they treat like a private club, my mother in the middle, my father with that proud chin tilt I used to try to earn, my sister leaning into the shot so the comments would call her beautiful and grounded, my brother holding court like he always does, and underneath it all a caption that read like a little speech about tradition and togetherness that left me with the kind of silence that does not feel empty so much as it feels like you have been dismissed from your own life without notice. I stared at that caption long enough to memorize the rhythm of it, long enough to realize it was not an accident, because people do not accidentally forget an entire person they are related to. They make a choice about who gets counted and who gets cropped, and as soon as I accepted that, something in me settled into the calm that shows up right after disbelief runs out of gas. I thought about all the years I let myself be the one behind the camera because it was easier than making a scene, all the albums built on the shape of my absence. All the times a relative messaged me to say the pictures looked amazing without noticing that I was the one who took them and also the one who was not in them. And I realized that I had been keeping their version of the family alive with my work while they erased me from the story, which is the kind of insult that only really lands when you finally stop pretending it is anything else. I did not cry, which surprised me, because if there is one thing I have always done after these little family performances, it is to cry alone and then clean up the evidence and get back to work. But this time I just sat there and let the facts line up in my head the way they do when you finally admit the thing you have been avoiding, and a very petty, very honest thought occurred to me that felt less like vengeance and more like balance, which was that if they were going to use the photographs I took to sell a story about unity that excluded me, then maybe I did not have to keep donating my labor to that lie. I scrolled back through years of posts and albums, not to hurt myself but to confirm what I already knew, and it was all there in plain sight. Moments I set up and captured because I am good at it. Moments they posted without a credit or a thank you. Moments that hung in their feeds like museum pieces about a family I apparently did not belong to, and right then I decided to do something I had never done, which was to use the very boring, very effective tools that exist for people who actually make things and would prefer not to have them used as decoration without permission. I filed the reports the way you file a receipt, not with rage but with clarity, attaching the originals and the timestamps, explaining that the photos were mine and that the people using them had neither paid nor credited nor asked. And then I went and made tea and did my emails and refused to sit there refreshing like a teenager waiting for a crush to text back, because this was not about begging for attention, it was about ending a pattern, and if ending a pattern means your aunt has to stare at a blank square where her favorite holiday brag used to be, then maybe she can consider that a free lesson in cause and effect. When the notices started to go through, the pings came in waves, first from my sister, all high indignation about how I was ruining memories, then from my mother, soft and wounded, asking why I would embarrass the family like that, and finally from my brother, who went straight for the cheap shot about how my career must be going so badly that I had time to play internet police, which is funny coming from a man who has built half his personality on the praise he gets from those very posts. I did not fight, because I am done fighting the wrong battles, and I kept my answers simple and steady, saying that if they want to share work I made, they can ask or they can learn to take their own pictures, and if they want a family memory that includes me, they can invite me, but what I will not do is prop up a narrative that treats me like the help. They did not apologize, because people who are used to being right in the story rarely apologize on the first try, and the calls ended with that tight-lipped tone that promises more drama at a later date. But I noticed something new in myself when I put the phone down, which was that the shame that usually creeps in after I defend myself never showed up, and in its place there was a very practical kind of energy I have only felt at work. The kind that says you can either keep reacting to their moves or you can set the board and make them react to yours. I am not going to pretend that taking down a handful of posts fixed anything big, but it made a point that has been sitting in my chest for years. which is that I will not be the invisible worker who makes their performance look complete while being erased from the curtain call, and once I let myself own that, the question changed from why they do this to what I am going to do next that does not ask them for permission. I thought about what matters to them, not in some cartoon villain way, but in the real way that families have habits and rituals and favorite places that carry a lot of meaning, and that is when I remembered something so simple it almost made me laugh. Which is that they treat that restaurant like a second living room. They go there for birthdays and promotions and holidays, and any excuse to sit where they can be seen, and as soon as I pictured them pushing through those doors full of that familiar swagger, I knew that any message I wanted them to receive would land best exactly where they feel most at home. I am not a destroyer by nature. I do not want to sabotage a dinner or make a scene that punishes the staff or throws other people into a mess that belongs to my family, and I do not need to stand at a table and deliver a speech no one will hear. But I do know how attention works, I do know how eyes move, and I do know that there is a difference between being loud and being undeniable. So I let the house go quiet, and I wrote down a single line on a sticky note because sometimes you need to see your own boundary in handwriting to believe it, and the line was this: if they will not put me in their picture, I will make my own frame. And once it was on paper, I stopped pacing and started making calls, not to them, because that road ends in the same ditch every time, but to people who sell visibility for a living and are very happy to help you purchase a moment that no one in your life can scroll past or minimize or crop out, and by the time I hung up with the second person, I realized that the next move would not live on a phone and would not require a single word from me. Because some statements are most powerful when they just sit where you cannot avoid them and do not blink. What finally steadied me was not anger or some wild idea about proving anything to anyone. It was a very plain inventory of my life that I had been postponing, because it is easier to keep running than to stop and look, and when I did look, I saw a woman who has built something real with the kind of stubborn work no one posts about, the early emails that land before most people have made coffee, the weekends that vanish into deadlines, the quiet deals that come from being dependable when someone else drops the ball, and yes, the recognition that arrived this year not because I charmed anyone, but because I delivered again and again until the people who actually do this work decided I had earned a place in the room. Which is how that industry award ended up in my hands, the one my family joked about like I had won a raffle at the grocery store rather than a vote from people who know what it costs to do this right. I can still hear the way my mother said she was proud, but the sentence was padded with air like it needed to be lighter. And the way my father asked if it came with a paycheck, because otherwise what was the point, and my sister's smile that meant cute more than congratulations, and my brother's favorite line about mortgages and real jobs. And I remember choosing not to fight because sometimes you have to protect good news from the wrong audience just to keep it alive long enough to matter. After the takedowns, I did something small that felt big, which was to treat my own work like it deserved the same care I give clients. So I filed the paperwork I had been too busy to file, updated the portfolio I had been too tired to update, requested the licensing letter from the photographer who shot me with the award at the event so that if I ever wanted to use that image in a big way there would be no one standing between me and the okay. And as soon as the official reply came back with my name in writing and permission attached, a funny calm went through me that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with possession, because there is a different kind of confidence that shows up when you can say this is mine without flinching. I did not broadcast any of it. I did not post a single thing. I just kept moving like a person who has a plan that does not require applause, and while I moved I let myself think about the one rule I was not willing to break, which is that whatever I did next could be sharp, but it could not be cruel for the sake of cruelty, because I do not need to become them to beat them at their own little theater. When you grow up in a family like mine, you learn to map the places that matter to them the way other people map vacation spots, and on that map there is one location that has always been their theater of choice. The restaurant that has hosted more of their performances than any living room ever did, a place they treat like a stage because the lighting is good and the portions are generous and the staff knows their names. And I realized that any statement I wanted to make did not need to storm the table or interrupt a meal. It just needed to live where their eyes naturally go when they step outside full of themselves and ready to be admired by whoever happens to be watching. I have walked past that block 1,000 times, and I know the corners like you know your own kitchen, and on one of those corners there is a billboard that usually cycles through car ads and personal injury lawyers. And I had looked at it 100 times without seeing it until now, which is when the idea that had been hovering became almost boringly obvious, because if they will not put me in their picture, then I will put myself directly in their line of sight in a way that does not ask permission, does not require conversation, and cannot be cropped without closing your eyes. I am not reckless with money, and the thought of paying for a billboard should have scared me off, but there are moments when the cost makes sense because you are buying more than space, you are buying clarity. So I called a friend in marketing who knows the out-of-home people and I asked for introductions, not favors, just names and emails. And within a day I was on the phone with a representative who talked about flight dates and proofs and placements like it was the most normal thing in the world, which it is to them, and I found myself nodding along and writing down timelines and realizing that the only thing that would slow this down was my own hesitation. I told her the exact corner. I gave her the restaurant name not because I needed them involved, but because I needed her to understand that the sightline mattered, that I wanted the board that sits opposite the entrance, the one you cannot miss when you step out and glance toward the valet, and when she pulled up the inventory and said there was an opening that could be held if I moved quickly. I felt that click in my chest that means the plan is real. The question then became what to put up there, and I knew it could not be a paragraph or a manifesto, because a good message does not try to do everything, it does one thing perfectly, and the one thing I wanted was presence, not apology and not insult. Just presence so undeniable that every person who has ever pretended I was not in the room would have to adjust the story in their head. So I opened a blank document and tested lines aloud until one sat down and refused to move, a simple sentence that told the truth without dragging anyone by name, a sentence that said I am not invisible, not anymore. The image would be the license photo of me holding the award, not because I needed to wave it like a weapon, but because it is the most honest shorthand for what they refuse to see. And pairing that image with that line turned the whole thing into a statement that felt clean and final and entirely mine. I wired the deposit with the kind of steady hands I wish I had always had around them, sent the high-resolution files and the licensing letter, approved the initial proof with 2 small edits, because I am who I am, and set the start date for the week their next big dinner is booked, which is the kind of nonverbal timing that feels almost surgical in its precision, and as soon as the confirmation email landed, I closed my laptop and sat there in the quiet, not giddy, not smug, just ready. Because I had taken the story they write without me, and I had written a new sentence in letters large enough to be read from across the street. And because I promised myself each step would carry its own small justice, I did one more thing before the day ended, something that felt petty and perfect and completely within the rules, which was to schedule a sponsored post targeted to the neighborhood that runs for the same week with the same line and the same image, not to chase strangers for likes but to make sure that the people who love to be seen walking into that restaurant cannot take a single step that week without meeting the version of me they insist does not exist, which means that when they show up for their next performance, the opening act will already be in place, silent, patient, and impossible to ignore. Once the deposit cleared and the proof with that single line looked exactly the way I wanted it to look, clean and final and not open to negotiation, I expected relief to arrive like some big feeling that would make everything feel lighter. But what actually happened was far more useful, because a very calm version of me took the wheel and started checking boxes in the order they needed to be checked, confirming the flight dates with the rep, confirming the print deadline with production, confirming that the license letter was attached in the job folder and not just floating in an email thread, confirming that the board truly faced the entrance I specified and not some other corner that would force me to pretend this was good enough when we both knew it was not. And in the middle of that practical rhythm came the first sign that my family could smell a boundary even when it was silent, because my sister suddenly texted to say she had been thinking about our dynamic and wanted to reset in the new year, which is the kind of vague olive branch people offer when they sense you are no longer available for the old arrangement. And while a softer version of me would have taken the bait and written a small essay about hope and forgiveness, The version of me who had finally learned to stop paying for seats I would never be given simply replied that I was unavailable this week and we could talk after the holidays if she wanted something concrete. The rep called me the next morning to say there was a small complication with the city inspection schedule that might push installation by a day unless we paid a rush fee. And I could hear in her voice the professional dance of telling the truth while leaving room for the client to choose. And I did not hesitate because if there is a skill my family taught me by accident, it is to know when a delay is simply a disguised decision. So I authorized the rush without flinching, asked for the updated timetable, asked for the cruise photo upon completion, and then emailed back a clean confirmation that took exactly one paragraph and left no room for confusion, which is not how I typically communicate with people I am trying to impress. But it turns out that when you are doing something for yourself instead of performing for others, your sentences get shorter and your spine gets longer, and that shift changes everything. Right after that call, my mother left me a voicemail with a careful tone she uses when she wants to be the reasonable one, saying she heard there had been some unpleasantness online, and that it would mean a lot if I could let the family move past it for the sake of the season. And I sat with that for a minute, because I am not made of stone and I do not like being the person who ruins things, but then I reminded myself that the things I am accused of ruining are almost always the myths that require me to be invisible. And I chose not to call back because the point here was not to argue or convince. The point was to stop underwriting a story that keeps me small. The production team sent the high-resolution proof, and I reviewed it the way I would review a deck for a client, not with insecurity, but with a check for accuracy and impact. And I approved it with a note that the line height should not be reduced under any circumstances, and the image should not be treated with any effect that softens it, because the whole message rests on clarity, and they replied that it was locked and scheduled, which allowed me to do the boring but necessary administrative steps that protect peace once the noise starts, like creating a simple email filter that catches anything from certain relatives and places it in a folder I can check when I choose rather than when their urgency arrives. Like scheduling my week so I have fully booked days that leave no empty space for second guessing. Like setting an alert to remind me to breathe when the installation window opens so I do not sit and refresh a screen as if staring at pixels could change metal and vinyl. The sponsored neighborhood post was approved by the ad platform with the exact geo-radius I requested and the narrow audience that makes it more likely to be seen by the people who spend time near that corner, and while I do not usually like advertising myself, I let it run without apology because this was not about strangers at all. It was about an audience of a dozen who needed to encounter a truth without me having to knock on a single door. My brother texted a screenshot of a group reservation confirmation for the restaurant, as if I would be impressed by the number of guests or the time slot, and the irony did not miss me that he sent it to the person not invited. And while old me would have rolled my eyes and thrown the phone on the couch, new me looked at that time like a gift, because it lined up almost perfectly with the window the rep had predicted for the installation, and I did something that might sound petty until you realize what it prevents, which was to book myself a table at a small place across the street under a different name and a different email, not to lurk or stir anything up, but to put myself in a position where I could witness the moment without having to stand on a sidewalk waiting like an abandoned guest. And I asked a friend to join me as a buffer with clear instructions that we would talk about normal things until the moment arrived, and then we would simply observe and go home. No speeches. No walk across the street. No throwing matches at a dry field. Just the quiet satisfaction of seeing a boundary do its job in the wild. There was one more practical step that seemed almost silly until I remembered who I am dealing with. And that was to call the out-of-home company's legal department to confirm the protocol should any third party attempt to claim rights over the image or request removal, because I know how quickly people who ignore you can transform into sudden guardians of propriety when the attention swings away from them, and the counsel on the phone was crisp and reassuring, walking me through the documentation already on file, the chain of permissions, the indemnification coverage, and the very simple fact that unless a court ordered otherwise, the display would remain for the full term, which allowed me to hang up with a feeling I wish I could have bottled for teenaged me, the certainty that preparation is not paranoia, it is kindness to your future self. The day before installation, my aunt tried the back door with a long message about how families drift and return and that my grandmother would be so sad if I made a scene, and I replied in one sentence that I would not be attending the dinner and wished them a pleasant evening, which is not dramatic and not cruel, but very different from the explanations I used to write in the hope that someone would understand me better. And after I hit send, I set my phone to do not disturb and went asleep like someone who had finally realized that peace is not the prize you get for being nice. It is the result of telling the truth and then acting like you believe yourself. On installation day, the rep texted that the crew was on site and that she would send me a completion photo as soon as the vinyl was mounted and the frame was secured. And I answered thank you and then closed the thread because hovering does not help workers do their jobs, and I went to my little table across the street and ordered something I could pick at without pretending to taste it. And my friend told me a story about her office that kept my hands from shaking, and then my phone buzzed with a single image that was not dramatic, not cinematic, just proof, the board standing where I asked it to stand with my face and my award, and that one sentence that had cost me years to earn. And while I stared at it, the hostess across the street glanced toward the entrance with a subtle look that means checks have been dropped and coats are being gathered, which is when my friend squeezed my wrist and said I did not have to watch if I did not want to. And I said I wanted to, because for once, I was not the one hiding, and as the notification bell on my ad dashboard quietly marked the first impressions in the neighborhood, I watched the familiar shape of my family begin to form near the door they always exit with that satisfied hum. And I realized that the next thing that would happen did not require a single word from me. They stepped out in that familiar cluster that always moves like a single thought. My mother just a little ahead because she likes to thank the staff, my father holding the door because he likes to be seen being decent, my sister smiling for whatever camera might be pointed in her direction, my brother already starting some joke that only lands when everyone agrees to flatter him. And then the whole group did that reflex my family has rehearsed for years where the eyes go straight ahead toward the valet stand and the curb and the glow of attention they believe belongs to them, except this time the attention did not float around them like air. It sat in one place and waited. And I watched the moment it landed on their faces, because there is no mistaking what recognition looks like when a truth you have refused to see finally refuses to move. My mother's hand went to her mouth in that careful way she has when she wants to look surprised rather than responsible. My father froze just long enough to read the line out loud in the voice he uses when he wants control back. My sister's smile collapsed into calculation as she looked for a way to spin it, and my brother tipped his head like he was about to laugh until he realized he was not the punchline, which is when his posture changed in that tight way that always means he is about to say something loud and dumb that will not help anyone. I did not stand up, I did not walk across the street, I did not wave or perform, because the beauty of a message that is finally on your terms is that it does not require you to plead for understanding. It just sits where it cannot be ignored and does its job. So I let it work while my friend kept her eyes on me so that I would not forget that there is a difference between winning and gloating. And after a long minute of the body language I know like a second language, they huddled and looked down at their phones in that frantic way they always condemned in other people, which is when I remembered that the targeted post was running and likely sitting in their feeds like a second echo, and the absurdity of that symmetry made me want to laugh in a way I have not laughed around them in years. The calls came first, of course they did, because calling is how they control the narrative, and I watched my phone light up with my sister's name, and then my mother's, and then my brother's. And I let every single one go to voicemail because nothing useful happens in a first wave, only noise and theatrics and demands that sound like apologies if you do not listen too closely, so I paid the check. Walked my friend to her car a block away so the scene could end without me in it, and only then did I sit on a quiet bench and listen, one message after another from people who were suddenly fluent in the language of concern, my sister asking what on earth I was thinking, my mother saying she wished I had spoken to her first because she would have found a better way, my brother blustering about legal action and defamation without understanding either. And then my father with a tone I had not heard since I was a teenager telling me I had made my point and I should take it down if I had any respect for the family name, and the strange thing was that instead of shaking or crying or getting angry, I felt the most ordinary calm because I had prepared for every single line. And preparation is a kind of mercy you give your future self when you are tired of living in reaction to other people's chaos. I called back only once that night, and I chose my mother not because I expected her to be fair, but because she is the only one who sometimes listens when you make it impossible not to. And I told her in one long breath that I did not do this to humiliate anyone or to start a war. I did it because being erased in private is one kind of pain and being erased in public is another, and I will not participate in either anymore. And if they want me in their pictures and their holidays and their lives, then the price is simple and non-negotiable. They have to ask me like I am a person who matters, and they have to stop asking me to take the picture so they can pretend I was there. There was sputtering and the usual appeal to tradition and the predictable reference to elders and respect, so I said the only sentence that felt worth saying, which was that respect is not a costume you wear at dinner. It is a habit you practice when there is no audience, and that I had been practicing it alone for long enough, and then I ended the call before the conversation could circle back into the same ditch. Because the new rule of my life is that I do not negotiate with versions of me they invented to avoid changing. My brother texted a screenshot of some template letter he found online about unauthorized use that would not scare a college intern. And instead of feeding that fire, I simply forwarded the licensing letter and the contract to the representative and asked her to keep them on file in case anyone tried anything clever. And she replied with the professionalism of someone who has seen 1,000 families in various stages of denial, assuring me the display would run the full term and that removal would require formal action no one on a group chat could conjure out of thin air. Which let me put the phone down without the old tremor that usually follows conflict and make myself dinner like a person who had done something clear rather than something dramatic. The next morning I drove by in daylight not because I needed more proof, but because I wanted to see if the feeling in my chest belonged to me or to the moment, and it turned out to be mine. Which is the kind of quiet victory you do not post about because it disappears if you turn it into content. And as I sat at a red light and looked at that sentence that had hung in my mouth for years without permission, my phone lit with a message from my father that was shorter than anything he has sent me in months and more honest than any speech he has delivered in years. A single line saying I made my point, and even though it landed with the kind of grudging tone that often precedes another round of control, I let it be what it was. A recognition that the frame had moved and would not be moving back. My aunt wrote a paragraph about forgiveness that ended with a suggestion that we take a new family photo on Sunday and that I should bring my camera, and I stared at that last part long enough to confirm she meant it, then replied that if there is a photo it will be taken by a stranger, and if there is an invitation it will be sent to me like I am a member of the family, not the staff. And then I turned my phone over and went to a meeting where I talked about work that pays my bills and fills my days with the kind of pride no holiday caption has ever given me. By the end of the week, the noisiness had settled into a low simmer, which is what happens when people realize that the old tricks do not work on a new boundary. And then a message arrived in the family thread that I have not been in for years, but apparently still receives emergency invitations. A simple note from my mother listing a date and a time and a place with my name in the salutation and no assumptions about roles. No hints about favors, no passive instructions disguised as love, and I did not respond right away because I have learned that power sometimes looks like taking a breath and letting other people sit in uncertainty for once. But I did copy the details into my calendar and mark it as a maybe. Because my revenge was never to burn the bridge, it was to put a toll on it that I collect and respect, and if they pay it, we can try again like adults who see each other, if they do not. The Billboard will finish its run, and I will go on with my life that I built without their applause. I do not know if any of them will ever admit what needed admitting, and I am not waiting for that admission like a hungry person waits for a meal, because the truth is I did not build the Billboard for them. I built it for the version of me who kept showing up to take the picture, and for the version who cried in bathrooms after dinners where she was not counted, and for the version who thought the only way to be loved was to disappear. And now those versions have a witness that never blinks. And that is enough. They did not include me in their photo. I bought the frame, I wrote the caption, and I hung it where their favorite story likes to end, and whether they invite me in or not, the ending belongs to me now, which means I finally get to leave the table when I choose. Not when I am dismissed, and for once that feels less like revenge and more like the kind of justice you do not have to justify to anyone.